Driving by, so we thought we'd drop in and say hello.
It was a dream of happy families on wheels.
Hey, how do you like our new car?
The Ford Motor Company brought it from Detroit to Dagenham, then sold it to Britain.
I'd sure like to shake hands with the man who designed it. Where is he?
Well, right now, he's working on a dream car for you folks.
A dream car. Wow, is it going to look like a rocket?
From the 1950s onwards, Ford revolutionized the cars we drove. They produced dream cars for the average British family.
The Angler was, to me, the epitome of style because of the grace of the cut on it.
In the 60s and 70s, Ford sold dreams to boy racers too.
When the Capri came out, you just looked at it and go, oh my God, that is just, I haven't seen a car like that before. You know, not one that I could afford. That was the power with Ford. They would offer a dream that was accessible.
But this dream came at a price. The mass production of motor cars required an army of assembly line workers who did jobs that were infamous for their soul-destroying monotony.
What you do, little tricks, I would have imaginary football matches where I might be playing, winning the FA Cup or designing something in my head. Anything just to get yourself out of it.
At its peak, Dagenham was producing more than 3,000 cars every day. Its most popular dream car of all time, the Cortina, sold around 5 million in Britain alone. But the assembly line workers had a love-hate relationship with the cars they made, and for some, the dream became a nightmare. This is the story of the rise and fall of Ford's Dagenham dream. The great invention of Henry Ford was the moving assembly line, which mass-produced the Model T. It would turn the Detroit-based Ford Motor Company into a global power and transform the car industry. As part of Ford's worldwide expansion, they opened a giant factory in Dagenham in 1931. Offering jobs to 30,000 workers, Dagenham was the biggest factory in Europe, and it breathed new life and hope into an economy crippled by depression. Promotional films made by the Ford Film Unit gave expression to the dream of putting Britain on wheels and selling a Ford car to every family. This included their own car workers, who from the beginning were paid above average wages in the hope that car and home ownership would encourage work discipline and loyalty. They were all part of what the company called the Ford family. In the hungry 30s, Ford soon brought new prosperity to Dagenham.
One of my mates, his father was out of work and he got a job there and his money was £0.50 an hour. Unheard of. It's £0.50 an hour. He become sort of the millionaire of the street.
Dagenham, built on the Thames marshes east of London, became a boom town. Everyone wanted to work at Ford's, including schoolboy Harry Coleman.
They wanted a tea boy, and the man who lived next door to me was a blacksmith, and he got a job as a blacksmith. And he said to my mum, "How old is your boy?" And my mum said, "Oh, 13. She said, "Oh," he said, "pity." He said, "Because we want a tea boy," he said, "and I could have took him down there if it had been 14. My mum said, "He's 14. He's 14. And with that, the next day I'm down at Ford's making a bucket full of tea for the men.
Harry entered the new time and motion world of the moving assembly line. The worker was a small cog in a giant machine. Production was broken down into repetitive time jobs, and the pace of work was kept up by foremen.
You had to be a big man to be a foreman. The simple reason is you have the discipline. That's why they always pick these big people, because when he said, "I want you to do that," you know, either speed up or something like that, if you're talking to a big bloke, you think twice, and you know, all right, I'll do it. But if you're a little bloke, you tell him to sod off.
During the Second World War, there was a new spirit of unity, with Dagenham playing a heroic role in the war production drive.
Britain's workers, like Britain's factories, have switched over from peace to war to protect the things of peace. And if carrying on with the job and keeping up the output of war materials is going to bring us nearer that next big switch over, the switch over to peace, then watch our smoke.
Ford supplied the British Army with around 250,000 military vehicles and trucks, along with 130,000 Southuhzen tractors that helped feed the nation at war. The war seemed to prove Ford's loyalty and value to Britain. Suspicion of its American ownership turned to admiration, and in 1948, Ford cashed in by introducing a revolutionary idea to Dagenham.
This is where a new idea moved in. At Ford of Dagenham, all plans for car production were recast in 1948, and a new criterion of the road was set: 5-star motoring.
Ford's 5-star motoring aimed to produce cars for the British market that were sleek, stylish and speedy. Scaled-down versions of American dream cars. They designed saloon cars as well as smaller cars like the New Anglia and Prefect. One of the Dagenham designers was Charles Thompson.
We used to spend all day talking about cars, sketching and drawing, and getting paid for it. It seemed, and I know this is only an exaggeration, it seemed that we used to sketch and draw all day long until somebody said, stop, we'll make that type of thing. Everything you drew, after a while, if your chief liked what you were doing, was translated into 3 dimensions. And this was clay modeling. Shaping a smooth line along the fender of the car, you would spend days and weeks just getting it to look right.
Ford's Dagenham plant was geared up to produce the new models. It was to be a breakthrough in British car production. The starting point in the whole process was the Thames Foundry, the largest foundry in Europe. Dennis O'Flynn began work there in 1953.
My first day there, I thought was going to be my last day. Suddenly find myself walking in black sand, molten metal all over the blooming place, unbelievable noise.
One of the jobs of the foundry men was casting the moulds for the car engines. This was one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire car-making process. It was here, in these swelteringly hot conditions, that the Ford assembly line began.
The length of the line and the speed of the line allowed the casting to get reasonably solid from the time it was cast. And then there was what they called a shakeout, and there was 2 blokes there pulling the moulds off. The sort of system they had in the shakeout was so physically demanding and so hot that they could only work half an hour at a time. Same team, no extra men for that, but they'd split up and they'd do half an hour on and half an hour off.
Ford wanted to promote a reverential image of the new car making at Dagenham. So in 1953 they commissioned a symphony to celebrate their achievement.
I don't know if any of you have ever visited a great engineering factory. It's quite an experience. I visited one recently, and I was greatly impressed with the common purpose of those who work there. There seemed a striking parallel between their skill with the machines and the skill of musicians playing their instruments.
But despite the orchestral metaphor of working together in perfect harmony, the reality of work on the assembly line proved to be very different. Henry Ford's regimented time and motion system for making cars alienated much of his workforce.
If you wanted to go to the toilet, they told you when you could go to the toilet, not Mother Nature. Somebody would be standing there timing you, and if you were 3 minutes, the foreman would come up and say, you've been away a long time, put his arm around you, and your cars were marked. So there was that, and there were occasions when you'd have a security bloke overhead on the balcony watching you.
Ford's orchestral film culminated in the gleaming cars rolling off the assembly line. This was the great reward for Ford car workers. Their families could buy one at a 20% discount. However, for some who worked on the assembly lines, the day-to-day pressures of making cars dented the dream of car ownership.
If you work there, there's no glamour in it, I don't think, because you're seeing them all day long and working with them, I don't think it knocked the glamour out of it. I think I've got one and that's it. You don't go round patting it every half hour and dusting it. Well, most people didn't, anyhow. It's just a convenience.
Nevertheless, for most people, it was a dream come true.
Beautiful to look at, fast to move with.
The affordable dream of five-star motoring paid off. By the late 50s, around 1 in every 3 cars sold in Britain was made at Dagenham. Ford were tuned into the aspirations of a new, younger generation, like Derek Forster.
New Year's Day 1957, that was when I became the proud owner of a Ford Prefect, and it was the deluxe version. I could have been driving a Cadillac for all I knew. And I was very fortunate because my parents had bought me that car prior to my 17th birthday in the March.
This was a time when car ownership was still a novelty that could set the curtains twitching.
I parked at the front door. I would pretty much guarantee, if my memory serves me right, we were the only car on the street. So you can imagine it was, you know, it made you feel good.
The love affair between men and their proud new possession was blossoming in streets all over Britain.
It was my pride and joy. I think I polished everything but the exhaust. Well, in fact, I think I polished that as well. The exhaust pipe. The engine was cleaner than the outside.
And the pulling power of a smart new car promised in adverts for Ford's five-star range seemed indisputable. It was certainly 17-year-old Derek's Ford Prefect, rather than him, that most impressed his first girlfriend, Sylvia.
To my way of thinking, it was as big as any American Cadillac that I'd seen on the pictures, this sort of thing. I had no idea what it was, what type it was, but it was just beautiful.
A new courtship ritual emerged in the 50s, a public display in which young couples showed off this very latest status symbol. To teenagers like Derek and Sylvia, their Ford Prefect was sex on wheels.
I really expected that people walking past would be thinking, who is that in that car? And I mean, when I look in retrospect and see it in old family photographs where Derek is standing with his arm on the top of the car and he's head and shoulders taller than that, how little it was. I didn't realise we possibly used a show horn to get inside.
Derek and Sylvia fell in love and became a couple. Every spare moment they had, they spent together in their Ford Prefect, often making for local beauty spots. But there was to be no hanky-panky in this courtship.
If you drove 5 or 6 or maybe stretch it 10 miles, you'd gone some. So I used to identify the lay-bys in a radius of about, 10 miles. And we'd go with a flask and perhaps a sandwich or a little cake or something like that, and sitting past the time in the car. And if it had been raining and the car had got slightly mud splattered or whatever, I would drop Sylvia off at home, 6 o'clock-ish, 6:30, drive home, put the car in the garage, wash the car, leather it off, and then polish it so that it was gleaming as new as if it was in the showroom. Dare I admit this, priorities were to my Ford Prefect. It won the day every time.
In 1962, a hit BBC police series inspired even more of the young generation to dream of driving Ford's new range of cars. The scriptwriters of Z-Cars wanted their fictional cops to drive Ford Zephyrs and Zodiacs, imitating the real Lancashire constabulary. It was the first of many cop shows to use Ford cars, and it made a deep impression on young farmer's son, Edwin Tipper.
I saw these lovely cars, very American looking, very glitzy, tail fins on, and lovely sounding engine. And I thought I'd got to get one of these.